A fixture on Ottawa's Parliament building is the clock tower. It's called the Peace Tower, and there are a number of hand-scribed tomes called the Book of Remembrance in its base. They catalogue all the people lost in service of Canada and Newfoundland's monarchy. I want to highlight two names in the first tome, titled In the Service of Canada. On page 151, Corporal Reginald Perrodou and John States of the 2nd Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery. The only soldiers to pass during the FLQ-centric October crisis, and in both ways so unfortunate, we think they are worth exploring. We won't go to lengths talking about the Front de Libération du Québec, or the Quebec sovereignty movement, or the October crisis in this video. Those are huge topics that have roots back to the conquest of New France. This is just an unfortunate snapshot that usually gets lost in the larger conversation because of those other factors. These men deserve to have their stories told, however tragic they are. Understand that the FLQ was a Quebec separatist group that resorted to violence to get their message out. The group kidnapped Quebec Labour Minister Pierre Laporte and British Trade Commissioner James Cross, leading to Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau and Quebec Premier Robert Bourassa putting Canada under martial law and Quebec under arrest without warrant territory. Quebec also used the military to protect civil servants and hold people to curfew. Many innocents were detained, all in the name of squashing a violent insurrection that wasn't really going to happen outside of a few nutcases. That makes the following accidental deaths even sadder. October 17th, 1970, midnight. The residence of Trudeau's finance minister, Edgar Benson. The 2nd Regiment Royal Canadian Horse Artillery is stationed at the guard post outside of the Benson residence. This being a martial law situation, they are in full battle dress, carrying weapons like the C1, the Canadian licensed FAL, and, well, the other C1, the submachine gun variant, a licensed production of the British Sterling submachine gun. To keep things easy, we'll call it the Sterling from now on. At approximately 12:50 a.m., a GMC Deuce and a Half rolls up with a contingent of bombardiers to switch out the guards on the west side of 77 Cartier Street. One such bombardier, Reginald L. Perrodou, or Perrodou, is carrying a walkie-talkie and a Sterling, both slung over his shoulder. He fumbles with the gear, and as he jumps from the truck, a shot rings out. Everyone hits the pavement, scanning for threats. Perrodou is lying there, one single shot to the head. What hit him? Where is the attacker shooting from? Did the FLQ just turn this small issue into a full-scale guerrilla war? No one can see any threats. Finally, a soldier goes over and checks the bombardier. His Sterling had gone off, sending a 9mm round into his head through his chin. Despite getting Perrodou to the hospital, he didn't make it, passing at 4 a.m. His wife was en route to the hospital when she hears the news. Mr. Benson is just as shocked, arriving at his residence well after the shooting and subsequent investigation. He had no knowledge that the incident had even occurred. He was quite surprised when he was heavily interrogated by jumpy soldiers as he tried to enter his home. Perrodou would be the only military casualty of the conflict. John States was in the same regiment as Perrodou and was a drinking buddy of his. States seemed to have a temper, but it also seems justified. The only other newsworthy story involving him had him protecting the area around the 2nd's base. He hit a snowmobile with a mop to stop some yahoos from endangering kids playing. States seemed really stressed out, and he had 6 kids, so I imagine he would be. October 20th, 1970. John and the other bombardiers are waiting outside the chapel to escort Perrodou from his funeral service to his grave, when States begins to feel a bit ill. Before anything can be done, he collapses and passes on the spot. The cause of death remains unknown to the public, but the guy had 6 kids. He was probably exhausted. If his prior outburst was any indication, maybe the stress finally caught up to him. 2 unfortunate and unforeseen deaths during a conflict in which no one fired at the military in anger is kind of a tragedy. But could it have been prevented? John States was perhaps genetically destined to go around 40, but Perrodou's passing came out of nowhere. Why was the government equipping our boots on the ground with such shoddy weaponry? Well, maybe let's look at the Sterling from a Canadian perspective. The Sterling SMG is a World War II iteration of the British Sten submachine gun. If the Sten valued production efficiency over safety and design, then the Sterling was the addition of form to the function. It was more comfortable to hold, more shoulderable, but the guts were essentially all Sten. The open bolt design stayed, and at least for the Canadian version, so did the stamped construction. Think cheaper and lighter, but overall not the same quality as a milled British Sterling receiver. Since I'm questioning the manual of arms here, let's go to the source, the 1961 C1 Submachine Gun Training Manual. On page 23, you'll find the alert and at ease carriage positions. I quote, "Alert. The gun is pointed at the target or probable target area, figure 6. The action will be cocked and change lever to A or R, butt into shoulder. The A stands for automatic fire, the R stands for repetition. Basically full auto and single fire respectively. At ease. With the sling around the neck, the gun is carried across the front of the body with the butt folded or extended. The action will be forward and the change lever at S. This carriage can be used for obstacle crossing, aka jumping from a truck. So what denotes the action being forward? That's the unload action. In summary, since this is an open bolt, there is no round chambered upon racking the bolt. Making safe is as simple as removing the magazine, softly dropping the bolt on an empty chamber, and placing the gun on S for safe. Loading is the opposite, but there is an odd step in the middle we'd like to point out. Step C loads the magazine and taps it. Step D places the gun on fire. Then you are to place a foot forward and put the gun on safe. Let's employ Occam's razor here and see what might have happened. The second came rolling in on a deuce and a half. Perrodou slung the radio over his shoulder. The antenna must have been caught in the trigger guard of the Sterling, or, and this is pure speculation on our part, the trigger guard was removed, as the Canadian version had that option for winter fighting, and this was Quebec in October. He was told to make ready, inserted a magazine, cocked the bolt back, placed the gun on A or R as his muscle memory told him. Instead of taking a step forward, he jumped from the truck, and, well, the rest is already written. Regardless of how it went down, the Sterling was a bit of an unnecessary menace for the Canadian government. The Army promised an inquiry, but also mentioned the quality varied from Sterling to Sterling, and that it was a brittle animal. Really? Then why are we equipping our men with it? The upside of the Sterling was that it was compact and light, which also made it easy to steal. After years of thefts, the Canadian government had had enough. SARP, the Small Arms Replacement Program, was put out for tender in the early 80s. This was Canada's push to modernize to the then NATO standards and one of the largest private defense contracts in Canadian history. Unlike the Ross rifle contract, this seemed to produce better results for the forces, as they still use the Dymaco C7 and C8s today. The Sterling would slowly be taken out of active storage and placed in vaults across Canada, being replaced by the previously mentioned Dymaco C8, but that's a story for another time. Thanks for watching.